Troublemakers, Part 7, 8, and 9. The Scythe and the Sword. Monarch Davin Aliostros watched the town of parasites through the lens of a satellite. His clawed fingers encased in a tungsten war gauntlet clacked against the arm of his throne. His advisor stood calmly at his side, observing the holoscreen with disdain. "Your Majesty, shall we use the satellite to make an example of these parasites?" The monarch stared pensively at the screen, reaching up and scratching his graying throat scales as he mulled over his advisor's words. The satellite had 13 gravity-driven kinetic projectiles on board. Just one would be enough to level the town, if he dropped it in the middle. But who would spread the word if there was Noonie left? Smiling softly, Monarch Davin adjusted the satellite to target the ground 1.5 kilometers away from the parasite's colony. He'd be relying on the shock wave to do most of the damage, but it would still be plenty lethal. "A wonderful idea, Advisor Knox. Let's see how rebellious they feel afterwards." Monarch Davin pressed a button on his throne's armrest and watched the satellite's video feed shudder before he deactivated the holoscreen. Glancing to his advisor, he cracked a malicious grin, shaking his head with pity. These dirty little apes are so pathetic I almost feel bad for them. But alas, they bring this on themselves, didn't they? Advisor Knox grinned softly and bowed deeply. "Correct as always, Your Majesty." Drake wiped the sweat from his brow, accepting a gourd filled with water from Gale, the little Clouville girl that was his neighbor. Uncapping it, he chugged back a healthy portion of the water, his dry throat aching with relief as he swallowed the cool essence of life. He smiled at Gale as he capped the gourd and handed it back to her. Drake settled his hands back on the plow, the groks hooked to it, grumbling in response as they got ready to pull. Drake watched as Gale began to run back towards the gate, heart swelling with happiness. For now they were free. It had been a week since he'd strung the high priest from the tree at the town's center, and life had returned to normal, albeit without slave masters cracking their whips at them. Drake was just about to nudge the groks into action when he felt the ground start to rumble. Happiness turned to stone-cold dread as Drake let go of the plow, running after Gale as the rumbling grew more violent. He felt like he was moving through molasses as he shouted, helplessly reaching for her. "Gale, wait!" The little girl turned, face scrunched with confusion. The green-skinned little girl suddenly smiled, head crests flaring in her species' version of laughter. She lifted a hand, waving nonchalantly. Drake watched, as if in slow motion, as an invisible wave of destruction shattered the town's thin defensive wall and tore up the ground as it raced towards him. And then it all went black. Death stepped onto the rubble of the dead town. He cast his gaze up and down the street as he walked, bloodless, heart heavy. Bodies were strewn about the rubble, human and Clouville alike. Death paused, looking down at a pair of bodies. A human woman clutched a Clouville child to her chest in a futile attempt to shield them from the shockwave. Death continued walking after a moment, drawn to the glowing congregation of souls at the town's edge. But not before a tattered white sheet was laid over the woman and child. As he got closer, he realized the souls of the recently departed were guarding something. No, someone. Death stopped a few feet away from the congregation, gazing at the glowing image of an old man with a braided beard. The old man did not offer a word to the Grim Reaper as he stood at parade rest. Death just gazed through them, looking at the crumpled form at the center. The boy's shirt and pants were little more than bloody rags. Cuts and bruises covered his body, one arm bending the wrong way at the elbow. Half buried in rubble, Drake was a pitiful sight, but he still drew breath. Death nodded in understanding, bones creaking as he sighed. "Forgive me for being rude, but it is time for us to go. Your leader will live." Death watched, waiting for them to step forward, but they didn't, which didn't surprise him much. He could feel it in the air. Their will to continue on filled the air so thick one could feel it in their bones. The Reaper sighed tiredly and finally asked his question. "There is something you want, something you think only I can provide. What, pray tell, is that?" Much to Death's surprise, it wasn't the old man who spoke, but a little Clouville girl who weaved between the legs of the other souls to reach him. Bravely she stepped forward, glaring at the scythe-wielding skeleton before her. "He fought them when we were all too afraid to. He offered his life instead of my father's for the arena. He gave us the gift of freedom, to do as we pleased without fear of the whip. Mr. Death, please, is there any way we can return the favor before we move on? Death panned his gaze over the resolute, determined faces of the townsfolk. Both young and old stood firmly at his champion's side. He felt his cold heart beat and sighed, letting the mask of bones fall away as he set his hand on the little girl's shoulder. A weary smile coming to the teenaged face of Death. I often forget what it means to be alive. To be human, if you'll forgive the euphemism. And yes, my child, there is a way you all may show your gratitude. Death raised his palm towards Drake's fallen form, and they all watched as it began to glow with a golden luster. Death spoke, voice echoing with power. If you wish to lend him your strength, step forward and lend me your hand. Gale smiled up at the Reaper and touched his hand, fading away as she spoke. Thank you. One by one, each of the townsfolk stepped forward to place their hand against Death's. One by one, they faded away with ghostly words of gratitude. By the end of it all, Death was left alone with Drake, palm glowing as he knelt and pressed it to the boy's chest. May their strength be yours. Make their fighting spirit your own. Drake glowed a bright golden hue as the Reaper's voice boomed with the overflowing power. And fight, my child, for what you and yours have been so cruelly denied. A patrol unit of 100 Gegnosian royal knights swept through the rubble of the destroyed town. Under the monarch's orders, they were to bring any and all survivors to him and then to neighboring towns, so that they may spread the word of what happens to those who oppose His Royal Highness. Captain Tarek paused by a pair of bodies with a sheet pulled over it. Pulling the sheet away, he confirmed the 2 parasites were dead with 2 quick trigger pulls before continuing on. Working his way towards the edge of the ruined town, he got a ping from one of his men and flicked his head to activate his comms system. Report in, have you found a survivor? Yes, sir, but just one seems pretty heavily injured, too. The captain grunted and did a quick comms check to see if anyone had found any other survivors. They hadn't. Sighing, he switched to the unit-wide comms network. All right, pack it in. Helm, bring the survivor to the holding craft and have their wounds fixed. No anesthetic, obviously. Receiving a grunt of confirmation, Captain Tarek turned on his clawed heel and walked back towards the line of hovercrafts they'd arrived in. He couldn't wait to get back to the capital city. The death ball match was scheduled for the next afternoon, and the monarch was participating with his own team of parasites. Something shiny caught his eye, and he pulled it from the rubble. Oh, that's a cool sword. I think I'll take that. Drake slowly came to inside of the rocking hover transport. Solid steel surrounding him on all sides. He looked around, slowly taking stock of his situation. He could feel that he was covered in bandages, but his wounds still stung like they were fresh. He wondered for a moment how he'd gotten here. Then he remembered that tidal wave of destruction. How Gale had simply disappeared in a cloud of debris. How the town had simply ceased to be. Everything he had fought for, gone in an instant. Drake rose to his feet, blood boiling with anger as he put a hand against the wall in front of him, feeling it move slightly. It wasn't a wall at all, but a door. Drake's mind was empty of all rational thoughts as he drew his fist back. He needed to punch something. He needed to kill something. His breathing became labored as adrenaline coursed through his system and he began to shake. He needed an outlet or he'd explode. He bellowed with rage and drove his fist forward, expecting to feel pain. He did not feel pain, however, as the door burst from its hinges and crushed a Gegnosian guard beneath its weight. Drake looked down at his hand, flexing and curling his fingers in and out of a fist as he stepped out of the closet-sized cell. A Gegnosian in power armor stared at him with incomprehension as the crushed body beneath the door made a squelching sound while Drake stood on it. Drake stared into the Gegnosian's terror-filled eyes as they shakily raised their Gauss rifle. What are you?" Drake let a cold laugh drip from his lips as he took a step forward, the Gegnosian shaking like a leaf. "What am I?" He took another step forward, and the Gegnosian's gun began to rattle with how violently they were shaking. "You want to know what I am?" Drake growled, breathing hard as he tried to control his bloodlust. He wanted to rip that lizard's head off and shove it up their ass, and he knew he had the strength to do it. But he wanted to make them afraid as the people in his village were before he came back. He wanted them to suffer. He took another step, and the Gegnosian suddenly locked up as Drake finally finished speaking. "I am fucking pissed off." The Gegnosian didn't respond, and Drake stared at them for a moment, rage cooling slightly as he realized something. He stepped forward and jabbed his finger into the Gegnosian's eye, which elicited zero response. Drake snarled and slapped the corpse to the ground. Pathetic. Drake looked at the door to the driver's compartment and picked up the dead Gegnosian's Gauss rifle. He propped the rifle beneath the doorknob and turned his gaze towards the double doors directly opposite the driver's compartment. Then he rethought and pulled the rifle from beneath the doorknob. Twisting the doorknob, he stepped into the driver's compartment. The driver turned their head to see who'd come up to the front, and his face paled as he stared down the barrel of the Gauss rifle. "Keep driving," he growled, nudging the driver's eyes back onto the road with the Gauss rifle's muzzle. The driver obeyed, continuing to drive as though nothing was wrong. However, Drake could smell that the driver had pissed themselves. "Where are we going?" Drake asked curtly, dropping into the passenger's seat, rage cooling off. He briefly wondered why he felt so calm about his village's destruction. But he disregarded it as he poked the driver with the gun's muzzle again after he didn't answer. The driver gulped and stuttered as he spoke. "We gotta make a stop by Golgotha and His Majesty's P Palace. He wants to give a personal message to you parasites." Drake jabbed the muzzle against the driver's face, making them flinch as he spoke. "Call us parasites again, I dare you." The driver gulped audibly and went silent, leaving Drake alone with his thoughts. Drake glanced down at his wrist, seeing his new scythe tattoo for the first time. Nodding, Drake felt he understood now. He had been given a mission, a purpose, and the strength to fulfill it. He would not squander it. The driver suddenly cleared their throat, and Drake looked up at them, giving them a nudge with the Gauss rifle to continue. The driver spoke up. I know I'm in no position to be making demands, but if you're going to shoot me, please don't shoot me in the face." Drake's eye twitched as he slowly grew a malicious grin. "Don't worry, I won't." The driver breathed a sigh of relief, but Drake wasn't done speaking. "I'm not going to shoot you at all if I can help it. No, you're going to swing from the gallows like the rest." Drake watched the driver tense up with no small amount of satisfaction. He wanted them to suffer as they had made him suffer, made his people suffer. If they wanted to play pretend royalty, then they could die like royalty. Begging for their lives as they're dragged to the gallows, begging for the mercy they never gave his fellows. But they'd get none. He would take no prisoners. All would be put to the sword. Drake watched as the rocky, desert-like terrain sped past outside the hover transport's window. The Gauss rifle remained firmly pointed at the now rambling Gegnosian pilot. Drake remembered his home, the small tin shack with its leaky roof. The broken scrap of mirror that sat above his wash basin, he'd salvaged that from the high priest's trash. He got a good whipping for that one. Even now, thinking back on it, he still felt the pain in the numb latticework of scars that was his back. He'd taken countless whippings and beatings for those in his village. He remembered taking the blame for a little boy who'd stolen some bread. Drake's vision blurred and he wiped his eyes. That was all gone now. Gone in the blink of an eye. His home, his town, all those he cared about. Gone. Drake turned his attention back to the pilot and his stomach turned. The pilot was baring their teeth like a rabid animal, hands crushing the steering wheel with hysterical strength. Drake finally heard what the Gegnosian was rambling about. "And if I'm to die, take me into your loving embrace, Mother Conquest. So it may be, so I have prayed." Drake pulled the trigger on the Gauss rifle, trying to stop whatever the pilot of the hover transport was up to before. The gun beeped, a cold mechanical voice buzzing from some internal speaker. "Safety engaged. Have a glorious day." "Fuck!" Drake shouted, as the pilot cackled and slammed both feet down, punched small red button on the dash, and cranked the wheel to the side. The transport lurched to the side, floating sideways with its momentum before it simply dropped to the ground. The transport flipped and Drake went weightless for a moment. Then he slammed into the roof of the transport as it rolled. He was flung around the cabin, regretting he hadn't put on the seatbelt as he was pummeled against every piece of metal in the machine. At some point, the windshield broke and Drake was thrown free from the vehicle, landing hard on the hard-packed, rocky ground. Drake's ears rang and his vision swam as he gasped for the breath robbed from him on impact. He slowly, painfully rolled onto his stomach and started to push himself up. Then a very familiar and at the same time, foreign sword landed in front of him. "You want to fight? You parasite! Pick it up. We have you outgunned, outmatched, and outnumbered by 97-1. You may have caught your guards by surprise, not us." Drake stared down at his sword, mesmerized by its change. Its shape had largely remained the same, but now dark black lines spread out along the blade from where it met the handle. The once plain leather grip wraps now the purplish-green scaly skin of the high priest. The once simple blob of a pommel had taken the barbed shape of angry flames. He clumsily grasped it just beneath the crossguard and felt a pulse travel through his entire body. He felt his strength return, felt the pain dull as he dragged himself to his feet. A voice screamed furiously in his head as he gazed out at the Geknosian soldiers in polished, well-equipped, heavy power armor. He slowly turned until he faced one with gold-colored armor, cocking his head to the side as a second screaming voice joined the first. "Who are you?" Drake asked, his voice distant even to himself. The golden-armored Geknosian began to laugh, quickly joined by the others until it was a chorus. Then, with a raised palm curled into a fist, the laughter stopped, and the golden-armored Geknosian spoke. "Who are we?" "Guess a parasite like you wouldn't know the royal knights from the lowborn who keep you." "Well, parasite, how do you want to do this? Do you want to fight?" "Ha! You're surrounded by royal knights and harsh terrain." "Run!" "Go ahead. You'll only die tired." A chorus of screams joined those already in Drake's head as red mist filtered over his vision. His shadow lengthened and stretched into that of a cloaked figure holding a scythe. Drake took a deep breath and widened his stance, gripping the sword in a fool's guard. The screams quieted as Drake spoke. "All I'm surrounded by—" He started, glaring directly at the Geknosian leader who'd taken a step back in surprise. The screams returned louder than ever, and now he recognized them. The bloodthirsty screams of an entire village crying out for revenge. He finished his sentence. "So, is fear and fertilizer?" Things seemed to slow down as Drake exploded forwards, a scream rising from the very depths of his being as he charged the golden-armored Geknosian, sword tip first. The black lines emitted a dark smoke as Drake's sword tip found the gap in the Geknosian's golden armor where helmet and chestplate met. Drake grinned madly as he felt the tearing of cartilage, the rending of flesh, bone, and metal through his sword as its tip burst out the back of the Geknosian's armor. Drake ripped the sword to the side, purple Geknosian blood and blue sparks flying as the golden-armored Geknosian's head fell to the side, hanging on by a scrap of flesh. Drake basked in the now palpable fear that surrounded him. He drank it in, feeding on it as he grinned at the nearest royal knight. "You're next." Drake laughed and the slaughter began. Drake and his sword danced through the Geknosian ranks like death incarnate. Sweeping kicks sent power-armored forms to the ground where his sword found their throats. Gauss slugs ripped at the boy's flesh, but none scored lethal wounds. Broken wiring spit sparks as limbs and blood flew. A few of the armored lizards ditched their rifles, using wrist-mounted blades in a vain effort to counter the frenzied swordsmen in their midst. Their blades gouged at his flesh, but Drake laughed in their faces as he proceeded to cut them down without remorse. Drake drove his sword through the neck of the final royal knight and jerked it free. He slowly, blankly gazed around at the mountain of corpses he'd created. His sword stopped smoking, his shadow returned to normal as he took a long, deep, closed-eyed breath. The swordsman grinned and raised his sword triumphantly before collapsing from exhaustion and blood loss. "That boy is a monster." The ancient gray-scaled Geknosian muttered as he lowered his binoculars. Sitting on a small hill a little over a kilometer away, Brown had observed the fight from a distance. It had not at all been what he was expecting, but that was a good thing. He glanced at the human woman by his side, one of the many enslaved humans he'd freed from his... No, they weren't his people anymore. "Cassandra, shall we go render aid?" "I doubt reinforcements are coming for a while." The woman lowered her binoculars and nodded. Her hair was cut raggedly short, her face marred with burn scars. "What do you think, Brown?" The old Gecnosian smiled and slowly got to his feet after retrieving his walking stick. "Very well. Let's get moving."